So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the 2023 offseason is fastly approaching for the Detroit Lions. The NFL Combine is in a few days. The NFL free agency market opens in just 2 weeks, and the NFL Draft is just a few months away. The Lions are going to change a lot as an organization over the next couple of weeks and over the turn of the 2023 offseason. And even going back to our last mock season video, there are a lot of changes. The Lions have more cap space, now sitting at $23+ million for the 2023 offseason, no longer having Michael Brockers as he was recently released. They have different coaches, they have different needs, they've come out with new information, and of course the NFL scouts and NFL media have started to hype up and show different prospects, as well as myself, of course, looking and viewing different prospects in different light than just a few weeks ago. So today, before the Combine comes out, we are going to go over the official 2023 Detroit Lions mock offseason from the eyes of me, Right or Wrong. Now, of course, we're going to go over free agency, UDFA, we're going to go over the draft, we're going to go over cuts and trades and anything that might happen this offseason to change the course of the Detroit Lions 2023 campaign. So, with that being said, let's get started and kick it off with the resignings. However, before we get to that, actually, we're going to take a look at the cap space going into it, because as I said, that has changed recently. The Detroit Lions, just a few days ago, ended up releasing veteran defensive tackle Michael Brockers, freeing up $10 million in cap space, putting them from about $13 to $23 million. That places them currently as the 10th most cap space in the NFL, but I think they can do a little bit better than that, as there are a couple cap casualty candidates that could potentially be cut by the Detroit Lions. And those two players are Charles Harris and Romeo Okwara. Now, if the Lions were to cut them, Romeo Okwara as a post-June 1st move would free up over $11 million for the Detroit Lions, while Charles Harris as a post-June 1st move would free up over $6.5 million, bringing the Detroit Lions total to $39 million to play with in free agency and re-signings. And with all the players that they want to re-sign and bring back at market value, they're going to need just about every penny. Now, we're going to take about 10 to 11 of that out in order to pay for our draft class, so that leaves the Detroit Lions with just over $28 million to spend on free agents, to spend on retaining free agents, and of course, just rebuilding the roster from the players that they're losing. So now, getting on to the 2023 URFA class, the unrestricted free agents, who are the Detroit Lions looking to bring back? What playmakers should be returning to the Detroit Lions in 2023, and what players should the Detroit Lions let walk? Now, first and foremost, I think the Detroit Lions should look to re-sign DJ Chark. DJ Chark was a great weapon down the stretch for Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions. He had a couple really big games, but was very impactful in every game after the return from injury, and I think he should be returning. His market is going to be roughly the same as last year, maybe a little bit more inflated. However, his market value as of right now is valued at just over $9.5 million. And he was very good for the Detroit Lions. A combination of him, Jameson Williams, and Amon-Ra St. Brown are a great receiving trio. Jared Goff now has chemistry with all three of them and should take another giant step forward going into next year, whereas he kind of had a slow start in 2022. Now, I signed DJ Chark to a 2-year, $19 million contract, averaging about that $9.5 million a season, but potentially backloading that contract for a big move later down the line. Now, the Detroit Lions then go out and they re-sign Alex Anzalone to a 2-year, $4.5 million deal. Again, average market of about $2.25 million a season, but we want to bring back the defensive captain and really the Jamal Williams of the defense at this point, somebody who's productive, somebody who's a leader, somebody who's a captain. Alex Anzalone makes a lot of sense to bring back in free agency. Of course, you have Jamal Williams, somebody that's currently valued at $4.5-ish million, $4.1 to $4.5 million, signing him to a 2-year, $8.2 million contract. These are averaged out across the years, but of course you can front and backload contracts to go with the math. And just as a reference, this is going to work financially. I used over the cap, and it will all work financially with the Detroit Lions with a little bit of cap space left. So I'm not going to necessarily go over all the cap numbers and where it leaves us, but trust me, I did do all the math, and this does work out eventually for the Detroit Lions. Plus, you can front and backload contracts as you see fit to kind of fit the narrative and put the pieces together to really put together a good football team. So moving on to Isaiah Buggs, a player that was a really good starter last year for the Detroit Lions, sitting at about a 1-year, $2.25 million contract. And then you move on to John Kaminsky, the biggest steal of free agency last year for the Lions class, coming in with a 3-year deal for $9 million, a significant pay upgrade from what he was seeing a year ago. He was a great player. He got production. He made the defense better. He was just all around the most impactful player on the defense a season ago, at least on the defensive line from a value perspective. So you have to bring him back. I think 3 years, $9 million would put him at age 28 coming out of that contract with enough time for another contract as long as he earns it down the line. I think this is a good move for the Detroit Lions to do that. And then on league minimums, I would bring back Brock Wright, Michael Badgley, Shane Zylstra, Scott Daly, as well as Tommy Kramer, as those are guys that are depth players. Those are guys that have produced for a while in the Detroit Lions system, right? Scott Daly, the starting long snapper for 2 years. Michael Badgley, great kicking season for the Lions. Obviously, Brock Wright and Shane Zylstra having 8 combined tight end touchdowns a season ago is something the Lions will likely look to bring back for a really cheap contract. And Tommy Kramer, of course, being a backup guard who did face injury concerns last year, but when he played in his rookie year, he was very good and solid to do so. Taking a look at the active free agency market, I don't see the Detroit Lions being incredibly active in free agency. I really don't think that they're going to be a big spender, despite being closer than they were 2 seasons ago or last offseason as well. But I think Brad Holmes is going to stick with his free agency mantra, being low risk, high reward, players that are productive, players that haven't always been starters, players that haven't always been in the limelight, but players that are talented enough to do so that will not break the bank. Now, I wanted to address all 3 big positions of need on the defense, being corner, defensive line, as well as linebacker, as players that could potentially come in and be starters, role players, and impact pieces for this Lions defense to help get them over the hump to potentially compete for a division, potentially compete for the playoffs. Now, looking at defensive line, I don't think the Detroit Lions are going to go big money. Daron Payne was already franchise tag. I don't think Dalvin Tomlinson nor Javon Hargrave are going to be in the market to come to Detroit. And I don't think Brad Holmes is going to be in the market to pay elite money to players that are 30 plus or just aren't certainly elite players. However, there is a player that is a very Brad Holmes guy, coming from Los Angeles and coming from the Rams defensive line. Michael Hodge last year had a very good underrated season for the Rams, and signing him to a 1-year, $1 million, very, very limited contract, right? But a contract that would keep him in Detroit for a year and put him on the defensive line could be really impactful. Having 8 quarterback pressures and 4.5 sacks a season ago, playing just 38% of snaps for the Los Angeles Rams defense, showed that he has the ability to get after the passer, has the ability to be a rotational piece, and could be another John Kaminsky, somebody that isn't going to show up and be a huge name player, isn't going to command $10-15 million a season, but somebody that could come in and just play their part, be super impactful, and be a good addition to the defensive line, but not breaking the bank in order to do so. I think defensive line, although it is a big need, it is a need that is more suited to address through the draft, while potentially linebacker and corner are 2 positions you could address more heavily in free agency, and that is what I did. Signing Azeez Al-Shaair to a 1-year, $4 million deal, a player that was overshadowed by Fred Warner in San Francisco, really the 3rd best linebacker on that team, but a starting linebacker on just about every single team in the NFL. Azeez Al-Shaair is somebody that has been overlooked, has been undervalued, but somebody that has been so incredibly impactful for the 49ers defense over the last couple of years that if he is to become a free agent, I think he would like to go somewhere where he can be the star. He'd like to go somewhere where he can be a linebacker one, and that's certainly the case here. He's a good coverage linebacker, is good in space, tackles really well, is a good leader. He has all the qualities to come in and be a really good free agent for the Detroit Lions going forward, and could really help shore up that linebacking core, and a 4-strong linebacking core of Alex Anzalone, Azeez Al-Shaair as your veterans, and then Rodrigo and Barnes as your young developing rookies, and of maybe potentially adding 1 or 2 players from the draft and undrafted free agency, leaves you with a young core, but a core with enough experience to get it done and enough production to be valuable at the linebacker position. And then, moving on to the cornerback position, I think Sean Murphy-Bunting is the perfect fit. Signing him to a 1-year, $3 million contract, a player that always finds the football, has good height, good size at 6 foot, and kind of being a prototypical size for a starting cornerback nowadays, has the experience on the boundary as well as in the slot, could potentially slide in as the cornerback one if it's not addressed earlier, or could slide in as a starting slot corner, or whatever the case may be. But regardless of what it is, Sean Murphy-Bunting should be relatively cheap, is coming off an injury-riddled season, so the market may not be as high as you would think, and the Detroit Lions could definitely use somebody with the skills and playmaking ability of Sean Murphy-Bunting, not to mention, of course, the storyline of bringing the kid home, the Central Michigan kid who went and was drafted by Tampa Bay in the 2nd round, could be a really good opportunity for him to return home and add some much-needed depth and strength to the Lions secondary. Now, moving into the NFL draft. Now, of course, free agency is going to be a little bit bigger. It's probably going to have 5, 6, maybe 7 players in the class like last season, but I don't see a whole lot of them being big, impactful players. Those are the real positions that need to be addressed, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Brad Holmes only picked up 3 or 4 players in the free agency pool because of the large amount of draft capital that they currently have, as well as the cap space that they like to save just in case. So, that is really the big free agents, right? Not necessarily any huge names, no record-breaking contracts, but 3 players that could be very impactful on the Lions defense next year and turn their defense from bottom 5 to at least average in the NFL, helping them get over that hump. Now, getting into the NFL draft, the best part of the offseason for Lions fans, and of course, the area where Brad Holmes and the Lions have thrived over the past 2 off seasons. Now, the Lions are sitting at 6. And the top 5 looks something like Jalen Carter, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Anderson, as well as Tyree Wilson. So the Lions have a choice. They pretty much can go cornerback or reach for Brian Brzee. However, there is a trade on the table with one top quarterback remaining, as well as 2 cornerbacks. The Atlanta Falcons called and they wanted to trade up 2 spots. They wanted to jump Vegas and they wanted to make sure Carolina didn't jump ahead of them in order to take Will Levis, the quarterback from Kentucky. And I wasn't going to hold them to a king's ransom. I wanted to get a couple extra picks in the mid to later rounds, kind of build up that portfolio a little bit, but also move back with the knowing that at 18, knowing that the Falcons are likely going to take a quarterback, and if they don't, the Raiders are going to take a quarterback, knowing that at least one of the 2 cornerbacks is going to fall to us at pick number 8. So I ended up making a trade with Atlanta, taking the number 8th overall pick, the number 113th overall pick, as well as a 2024 5th round selection. Now, these are 2 day 3 picks to move up 2 spots. I know it might not be some incredible, crazy value, and I probably could have gotten more, but again, it was just 2 spots down. One of your 2 top cornerbacks is guaranteed to be there. So I think picking up 2 extra picks that historically have turned into guys like Amon St. Brown or Malcolm Rodriguez or James Houston, right? Those kinds of picks are picks that you want Brad Holmes to have because historically he's been very good at hitting on those. So getting him a couple extra picks this year and an extra pick next year in the 5th round could be really big value, especially if he continues to turn those 5th round guys into 1st round projections and 1st round talents. Now, trading down to number 8, neither cornerback came off the board. Actually, the Falcons went quarterback, and then the Raiders picked Anthony Richardson at 7 with the top 4 QBs off the board, leaving both Christian Gonzalez as well as Devon Witherspoon with the 8th overall pick. Now, I've talked a lot about Devon Witherspoon and how he'd be a great pick for the Detroit Lions, but I think Christian Gonzalez would be very good too. Christian Gonzalez has a little bit more prototypical size, has a little bit more prototypical arm length, has a little bit better production as far as turning the football over, and I think he would be a really good pick, and he is many people's cornerback one. So for the sake of this offseason, I'm going to address the cornerback need with Christian Gonzalez at number 8. Now, I think you can switch this very easily with Witherspoon, and it still makes a lot of sense, but Christian Gonzalez has the better size, has a little bit better length, has better ball skills, in my opinion, at least as far as catching the football, has better hands, and is a really, really good cornerback who I think would fit very well in Detroit overall. Now, we move down 10 spots to pick number 18, and there's a player that has been flying up the draft boards over the last couple of weeks, somebody that has played both interior and exterior defensive lines, somebody that has played edge, somebody that has played defensive tackle, somebody that has played the 3-tech, and that player is Lucas Van Ness, the pass rusher from Iowa. Now, I have not always been very high on Lucas Van Ness. However, after watching him very recently, I think he is a very good player. I think he is built a lot like Tyree Wilson, who's projected to go in the top 5, but he has better bend than Tyree Wilson around the edge. I think he could play a lot of different positions. He played the 3-tech at Iowa, he played edge at Iowa, and that is something the Detroit Lions really, really need, right? Having a top player, somebody who is built like Lucas Van Ness, somebody who moves like Lucas Van Ness, is not a person that is going to be there very often in the draft, and really solidifying both your run stopping ability as well as your pass rushing ability with this pick, right? Your edge rushers now look like Aiden Hutchinson and probably Lucas Van Ness on early downs, and then you sub in James Houston on pass rushing downs. You have, of course, John Kaminsky to come in. You have, of course, Josh Pascal to come in and play some snaps as well, and it's a really deep, young, but super talented rotation of pass rushers and run stoppers that should help the Detroit Lions complete their defensive line, helping them improve their pass rush as well as their run stopping ability in just a single pick. Now, moving on to the 48th overall pick, the second round. This is where we're going to get a little bit crazy. We're going to go a little bit off the rails, but rumors have been flying that the Detroit Lions are very much in on the Jalen Ramsey trade, bringing in an elite top 5 cornerback who is only 29 years old and still playing at an elite level. Could be a really good idea for the Lions, right? They're the 30th ranked passing defense a season ago, and yes, we addressed cornerback with Sean Murphy-Bunting. We addressed cornerback with Christian Gonzalez, and we have some young players like Jeff Okudah and Jerry Jacobs. But none of those players are likely to be elite, right? We've seen Jeff Okudah, and he's had really good moments and really bad moments. I wouldn't go into 2022 banking on him being an elite cornerback because he's yet to show the ability to do so consistently, as well as the ability to stay healthy for an entire NFL season. Christian Gonzalez looks to be a great prospect, but he's still a rookie. We don't know what we're going to get from him, and expecting him to turn into Sauce Gardner on day one is a little bit of a stretch. And Jerry Jacobs, while I think is very good, still leaves a room for an upgrade. Now, Jalen Ramsey is a top 5 cornerback. I understand he's expensive. I understand that he is a little bit older. I understand that he's been declining steadily over the last 3 years, going from a truly all-pro Hall of Fame level play to probably Pro Bowl, all-pro, but the lower end of that spectrum, and last year not getting the all-pro nod in favor of some of the other players like Sauce Gardner. However, Jalen Ramsey is still very much an elite cornerback in today's game, and that Week 17 game, Week 18 game versus the Seattle Seahawks showed exactly why he can still be elite. The Rams had no pass rush, they had no help on the back end, and yet Jalen Ramsey was still covering his guy for 4 to 5 seconds, still coming up with the football, had 2 interceptions in that final game, looked like an elite cornerback, and could still be that guy. He did not fall off statistically very much from his all-pro season in 2021 to his apparently not so all-pro season in 2022. He is still a very good cornerback, and while being expensive, is a top 5 player at his position in the NFL. He has the physicality, he has the mentality that Dan Campbell and the Detroit Lions are going to look for, kind of that I'm the guy mentality, right? Jalen Ramsey knows he is the guy. He knows he's a top cornerback in football, and he absolutely plays like it. Good press man corner, really sticky in coverage, actually guards people for 4 to 5 seconds, which he wouldn't have to do on the Lions with the pass rush that they've built over the last couple of years. I think this would be a very expensive move. This would be a very big move for the Detroit Lions. However, the second round is historically cursed for the Lions in general, right? The second round picks don't usually work out, and if they do, they're very injury prone when they're not on the field. or even when they're on the field, they're on the field very limitedly because they are very injury prone. And of course, you're upgrading and getting a guaranteed elite player for an unknown second-round pick that historically isn't very good. So this trade involves Jalen Ramsey in the 48th overall pick, but I'll also be sending the 56th overall pick, or the 55th overall pick, for Jalen Ramsey in pick 182. It is a high 6th round pick at the tail end of the 5th round. It's a top 3 pick in the 6th round, where again, historically, Brad Holmes turns those players into elite playmakers. So that is the trade we're going to make. We're going to walk away from this offseason with an elite cornerback in Jalen Ramsey, an elite prospect in Christian Gonzalez, an opportunity for Jeff Okudah to either slide into the slot or be more of a role player, nickel defender like he was versus the Dallas Cowboys, where he played like an elite player. And we're going to go in with more cornerback depth and more cornerback talent than this team has seen since Darius Slay was traded over 5 seasons ago. So we have that, but we give up our 2 second-round picks. So now we got to wait till pick 81. We got to wait till the 3rd round, go all the way down to pick 81, where the Lions are going to select Sidney Brown, the safety from Iowa, the safety from Illinois, staying in the Big Ten, staying at the secondary position. The Detroit Lions are going to pick a safety. Now, Sidney Brown is a player that is getting a lot of hype right now. And when watching his tape, he reminds me a lot of a current and a former NFL player. And I'm not saying he's going to turn into a Hall of Fame safety. By no means am I saying he's going to be the elite prospect or the elite playmaker that these guys were, but he reminds me a lot of Talanoa Hufanga when he was coming out of USC, and to a lesser degree, reminds me a lot of Troy Polamalu, the safety, the all-pro, potential Hall of Fame safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has a knack for making plays. He's a good tackler, has great instincts, has really good range, has a nose for the football. He just creates so many timely big plays for the defense, whether it be sacks, whether it be big hits, whether it be 4th down stops, whether it be interceptions, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries. He does everything for that Illinois defense, and he was easily the best player of that secondary, easily the best member of that team in general, and that's saying something with a guy like Devon Witherspoon expected to be a top 10 pick. I think Sidney Brown was a better secondary player because he made more big plays in big moments. And again, that ability, that knack to make a big play in the biggest moment reminds me a lot of Troy Polamalu and a lot of Talanoa Hufanga when he was coming out of USC a few seasons ago, who at the time I had graded as a 2nd round pick and has then turned into a Pro Bowl caliber safety with the San Francisco 49ers. I think this would be a great pick, would actually truly secure our secondary for the long term, especially knowing Deshaun Elliott isn't going to be returning for next season. That would give us 3 really good safeties, 2 of which were actually from Illinois, so they have the chemistry to work together, as well as Tracy Walker returning, and then the cornerbacks being Jalen and Gonzalez and Okudah, and of course you have Murphy Bunting, and you have Jerry Jacobs, and some really, really good players. Now, moving down to pick 113, the pick that we got from the Atlanta Falcons, I wanted the Lions to address wide receiver because while DJ Chark is returning, Jameson Williams has upside, and of course Amon-Ra St. Brown has everything. The Lions aren't necessarily as deep at wide receiver as you might think, right? Khalif Raymond is returning, and Josh Reynolds, I believe, is returning for 1 more season as well, but Josh Reynolds was very injury-riddled throughout the 2022 season, while his backup, being Quintez Cephas, also missed a majority of the year. And with the opportunity to take A.T. Perry, the wide receiver from Wake Forest, having back-to-back 1,100-yard seasons, standing at 6'5", and having double-digit touchdowns both of his last 2 collegiate years, at the 113th overall pick, that guy could turn into your X wide receiver. That guy could turn into an elite ball winner in the end zone. And even if he's not a big play threat early, even if he's not necessarily the biggest name in the draft, he's not the best wide receiver in the draft, you cannot ignore a 6'5" player with back-to-back 1,100 yards and double-digit touchdown seasons, even if it is in the ACC, even if it is at Wake Forest with some manufactured production. The Lions could use depth at wide receiver. DJ Chark may not be here forever. 2 years is not a long time for a wide receiver, and they could structure it so that they release him even sooner than that. Jameson Williams looked incredibly explosive. Amon-Ra St. Brown looked great. Khalif Raymond is great, but the Lions are lacking that true big body, jump ball, ball hawking receiver if DJ Chark is no longer available, and they could use a red zone threat, and they could use a developmental big body guy that is super productive in college and finds his way to an NFL roster. So I have A.T. Perry being the 113th overall pick. Wide receiver, not the biggest need at this point. However, it is a need that could potentially be filled for depth and future purposes. Moving on to pick 154, Chandler Zavla, the guard from North Carolina State, was the best prospect on the board remaining. He's a guard from North Carolina State, has not allowed a sack in the last 2 years, is fairly good at the rushing attack and run blocking. He is somebody that could slide in on day one, being a 4th or a 5th round pick, somebody that could just slide in, be a really solid offensive lineman, right? Whether you want to keep Big V and let him develop for a year, whether you want to just plug him right in, I think he's ready to play right away. You could plug him in and he could be an instant starter on the offensive line, allowing you to cut Big V, free up $9.5 million, and help pay that Jalen Ramsey contract and open up another $9.5 million for the Detroit Lions to use that you didn't otherwise have before. Now, I didn't want to cut Big V before I knew I could address the guard position, but now that I've addressed it with a player that I know can be a good time starter, I feel comfortable releasing Big V and clearing up that $9.5 million to place elsewhere along the roster. Moving on further into the draft, at pick 182, Aubrey Miller, the linebacker from Jackson State, the SWAC player of the year, SWAC defensive player of the year, I should say, from Jackson State, had over 100 total tackles, was super productive. The last time the Lions went Jackson State in the 6th round, it worked out pretty good. So we're going to go get his former teammate in Aubrey Miller. Going forward, we're at pick 183, the very next pick. I wanted the Lions to address running back because DeAndre Swift is injury prone. Jamal Williams is a good goal line back, but isn't necessarily the best yards per carry back in the NFL. And we let Justin Jackson go in free agency. So I wanted a ball carrier. I wanted a running back, somebody that is a true elite runner of the football, even if their passing attack isn't ideal. And the best player on the board was Mohamed Ibrahim, the running back from Minnesota. Now, in 12 games last season, he totaled well over 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. Every single season he has been healthy. He has rushed for over 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns. And yes, he has a lot of tread. He has over 800 carries in college. But he reminds me a lot of Jonathan Taylor in the way that he runs, and his speed, and his power, and his contact balance, even in the way that they were both bell cows in college and have concerns going into the NFL. I think that Mohamed Ibrahim could be a really, really good runner of the football in Detroit behind a great offensive line and could potentially turn into a Jonathan Taylor-esque player if he can stay healthy. But if not, it's a 6th round, 7th round pick. Who really cares? It's a swing at a potential great running back. But if you miss, it's fine. You still have 2 really good running backs and can go find another one in Craig Reynolds as running back 3 or 4. It all works out. But if it hits, you're going to be in a really good position. And then with the final pick, the 194th pick in the NFL draft, I have the Lions addressing quarterback, taking Purdue quarterback Aiden O'Connell from the NFL draft. Now, Aiden O'Connell is not a great prospect, right? He's obviously up there with the Bryce Young, CJ Strouds, Anthony Richardsons, or Will Levis, but he is somebody that is 6'3", has a good frame to be an NFL quarterback. He has a good enough arm to be an NFL quarterback, but where he really thrives is his accuracy, his ball placement, and his decision making. And honestly, he reminds me a lot of Jared Goff, right? I think Jared Goff has a better arm. Jared Goff, of course, has better experience. But if you're talking about accuracy, they're both pretty close. You talk about decision making, they're not that far apart. You talk about, leadership, they're both really good leaders. Neither one is a statue, but neither one really is going to scramble or run for 1,000 yards in a season, or they're not going to rush more than 2 times a game at the absolute most if they need to. But both players are pretty comparable. Both players are fairly identical. And honestly, if Jared Goff is to go down with an injury, I think Aiden O'Connell may be the best suited rookie to suit up for the Lions, take the reins, and not miss a beat with the starting offense. So I wanted to address backup quarterback, right? Not a competition for Jared Goff. Jared Goff is still very much the guy in Detroit, but getting a backup that plays very similar styles of football, getting a backup that could plug in and play in the result of Jared Goff missing a few games could be really, really important down the stretch of a grueling NFL season. So with all that being said, that is the Detroit Lions mock offseason. That is where the Detroit Lions stand right now. In this mock offseason, they brought back all of their playmakers from a season ago that are really, really important. They addressed the 3 biggest needs in free agency. They got not one of the top cornerbacks in the class, but then traded for an all-pro caliber cornerback on the other side and a secondary pairing of Jalen Ramsey, Christian Gonzalez, Okudah in the slot, Tracy Walker at free safety, and then, of course, Kirby Joseph at the other safety position would be incredibly difficult to pass on. And then you have the pass rush from last year with elite pass rusher James Houston, as well as the great rookie or now second-year player in Aiden Hutchinson, adding Lucas Van Ness to that defensive line and Azeez Al-Shire to that linebacking core. That defense should be much, much improved. And then, of course, you even add a few players on offense. A great runner in Muhammad Ibrahim. You had a great receiver in A.T. Perry. You add a really good safety prospect in Sidney Brown. You, of course, have Michael Hodge returning. You have Sean Murphy-Bunting in that secondary. That defense looks much, much better, and even the offense got a few upgrades here and there. So with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. That is my official Detroit Lions mock offseason. Let me know what you guys think about it. Again, I checked all the numbers. They all work out eventually. You'd have to backload a few contracts. You'd have to front load a few contracts, maybe restructure Jalen's deal just a tiny bit, but it will all work out eventually and will all make the Detroit Lions not only a competitor for the NFC North, but a potential competitor for the Super Bowl. So with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think. What would you think about an offseason if it were to happen in this way? I'd be very curious what you guys think. With all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, and as always, go Lions.